The Power Factor Show with Rick, Steve, and Caleb. Episode 85.
You can find this podcast and others at Gun Rights Radio Network, gunrightsradio.com. Podcasting freedom.
Brought to you by Safariland and Hodgdon, the gunpowder people.
Hi, welcome back to the Power Factor Show. This is part 2 of shotgun loading. I'm John, and we've changed garages. We've also changed days, and it's kind of warm and bright and kind of a nice day out. I think what I want to do is go through what I use, the press I use. I have 2 of them. We can show you some things specifically about the 366, go through the shot bottles, the bushings, and then the components that I am loading with. Basically, I have 2 366s. I have one set up for what Steve refers to as my bunker load, but it's just really a fairly fast trap load. And I have one set up for skeet. And the reason I have the 2 doing the separate loads is that the skeet load has so much less of a faster powder in it that it would not crimp correctly. Steve was talking about having crimps that dish down and have a big hole in them, and I had several that I would get done shooting a round of skeet and have a pocket full of shot. So I, excuse me, I got my second press down and set that up, so I'm making pretty good looking skeet loads now. I have never loaded on anything but a 366. The reason that I picked a 366 is because a friend of mine had one, and then another friend bought one. And I like it because, unlike the mech products, I think it's really robust. It's big. There's very few tiny little pieces. The adjustments, I think, are easy to make on it. And it just looks like a press to me compared to what the mechs are. And which is interesting because mech probably sells more presses than all the other press manufacturers combined. They do make a quality product. It is reasonably priced, but there's just something about them that does not appeal to me. So this is my trap 366. And we can go through and talk about each station here, or we can do it when we put a shell through and then load some rounds for you. So we'll probably do that. But I have said before that loading shotgun is just exactly like loading metallic, only it's totally different. And this press has the stations on it that would do the same functions on a metallic press. It'll resize, it'll decap, it'll place a primer, it'll seat a primer, it drops powder, it will insert the wad, does shot, pre-crimp, crimp, and does a roll crimp at the end to facilitate use in a semi-auto or a pump gun. And unlike Steve, you'll see I handle a hull once. It goes into the press and that's it, and it comes out of the back. When it's all done, there's a chute back here that it comes out of and then drops into a bucket. And I don't have to handle them. It does use shot and powder bushings and shot bottles. These are the bottles or tubes that came with the press. You can see they're not real big, they're plastic. They have the baffles in them, and Steve talked about baffles before, of when you get down fairly low, of getting more consistent powder and shot drops out of the press. These bottles are aftermarket. This will hold a bag of shot, 25 pounds, and at least a pound of powder. So you don't have to stop on a regular basis and replenish those supplies. It also uses bushings. And Steve went through and showed you getting a recipe, figuring out how much powder you need to drop, how much shot you're going to drop. And these bushings, shot bushing and a powder bushing, just slide into the bar, which slides back and forth every time the press is cycled. And I'm going to be loading 7/8 of an ounce of number 9, and I got to look, and I think I'm dropping 16.2 of clay dot, not clays. And that's another interesting thing, that clay dot performs very similar to clays, and you can generally use the same recipes. You will use different bushing sizes because the powder densities are different, but if a recipe calls for something like 17.2 of clays, you can use 17.2 of clay dot. So, and I am using the Clay Buster CB0178 wads. It's a 7/8 ounce wad, and Steve talked about this too in his part. He's using the pink wad, which is, it'll go 7/8 of an ounce or 1 ounce, and the difference in the two wads is the length of the crush section. So I'm using the longer one to get the proper stack in the hull so I can get good crimps out of it, rather than having the centers pushed down like Steve is doing. So I think what we should do now is probably load the press up with components and then run a shell through and talk about each of the stations and what it is doing. So unlike Steve, I use a lot of components. I don't have my hulls sitting there one at a time to pick up. I have these hoppers, which I bought from Midway. I tried several different things to hold components. I had little plastic trays, and it just didn't work. I tried it with cardboard boxes with a low lip on them. That didn't work either. And these work really good. They're like 10 bucks. I know that Midway sells them. And probably just about any of the shotgun supply places where you can buy components. A lot of guys laugh at them when they see them, but they work really good for me. So we just dumped 500 wads into the wad hopper, and we'll get the tight lid off of the powder measure. And you can see this is real precise measurement. Yeah, clay dot, clay dot, clay dot. So we'll load that up. Then put this back up next to the Hodgdon International. See, so I do use everybody's powder. And then this is the fun part, is picking up the bag of shot and not having it go all over the floor. And where's my razor blade? I'll be right off of the Shotshell bag, and hopefully I did the right end that the thread will pull out like that. And now this is where it gets interesting. So that's 25 pounds of shot in there now. And that'll give me somewhere between 450 and 455 shells. And Northwest Magnum, number 9. So we'll put the wads back there, and now we'll get some hulls out. So that part's pretty easy. So what don't we have? We don't have primers. So we get some of those. Steve's press has like a primer tray on it, which seems to be working pretty good for him. I really like the system that this uses. It has a tray that you can dump the whole package of primers in. And then you do that and knock a couple of them over. And you do it again. Come on. Goes on top of the primer feed tube, and you just crank them in until it's filled. And I probably shouldn't have done that. If we just take one shell now and work our way through it. So Steve's press had the collet resizer on it, and this one does not have a collet sizer. It is a ring sizer, and it is a station by itself. It's the first one that will decap, take the primer out, and also resize the head of the case. And I usually resize when I pick hulls up from the range and bring them back for the first time. I'll do them in big batches. I take the shot bottles off so the slide's not going back and forth. It's not packing or shearing any shot. It's not packing powder into the bushing, so the first load you get out of it is going to be a real good one. And run through all of those. Shells that I have shot out of my guns, I do not resize again unless there's a problem with them, and so far there hasn't been. And if you look at like Lyman's manual, there's a couple of different schools of thought, and if they go in the gun, if they don't overexpand, if it's not going into something like an 870 with a really big chamber where it can blow out, you shouldn't have any problems with it. So each of these stations, like I said before, performs a function similar to a metallic reloader. So at the first station, and that's the only time I'm going to handle that hull in the process. You saw Steve have to move the hull physically from station to station. This hull is going to stay here. And I probably shouldn't have filled it up with primers, but that's okay. So at the first station, so here at the first station, the way that I'm using it today, because I have shot these hulls, all I'm going to do is push the primer out. And I got it. At the same time, it has dropped the primer into the shell plate, and it's going to rotate. That primer then drops into the primer seating station, and I'll pull the handle again, and it pushes the hull down onto the primer. So where it was real easy for Steve to take the hull out and show you what's happening with it, that's one of the drawbacks on this press, is that once you have a shell in there, you can take stuff out, but it is a real pain to do that. I've gotten to be pretty good at it because I've messed some holes up reloading, and it's really not that difficult, but it's just a pain because it slows you down. So we're over here to the powder drop station now. That's this one. So I'm going to open the slide on the powder measure, and you'll notice too that every time the handle is pulled, the charge bar slides back and forth. So every time it's pulled, if the slides are open under the bottles, it will drop. And that's another thing that you learn real quick, and you get real good at sweeping up shot and powder. So we're going to drop a charge. So now we've got a powder charge in it, and I'm going to close that slide. I'm going to come over and the swing out wad guide. So this swings out, so you don't have to reach into the press and try to place it. Just drop it in there, and it pushes it in to the depth that I have it adjusted to. So then it comes over to the shot station. I just opened that up, and it'll drop a charge of shot into that hole now. So now I closed it, and I've got way too many primers that I didn't pick out of it. So now it's over at the pre-crimp station. Steve talked about that too, and saying that 366s talk about something like 1/4 of an inch opening across the inside of the folds. And I have this set to go much tighter than that. And the reason for that is because of the variance in lengths of Remington's hulls, and especially the black ones. They're the worst of all of them. So I have it set probably maybe a little too tight, and I will get swirls in the crimp at the center. But also the shorter hulls will close enough that they won't leak shot and they're usable. So I got all these turned off. So we put the pre-crimp on it, and you can see it's come up pretty good cone. And now it's going to go into the crimper itself, and that's crimped, and that's another primer. And now it's over at, I always forget the name of this station. It's the last one to finish the crimp, to put a roll on the edge of it so it will feed through a semi-auto or into a pump gun. So we do that, and then the way my press is set up here, I have a hole in the bench with some ABS plastic pipe and a couple of fittings, and when it leaves the press, it drops into the bucket. And I don't have to handle them again, especially these, because I put these into another bucket and take them to the range. I don't even box them. I will box up my trap loads. So we've just pushed the primer out, so it is now deprimed. The size is the same as it was when it went in there because I did not run it through my resizer. So now we'll go over to the primer station, because at the time that we pushed the primer out, it dropped a primer into these holes between the cutouts in the shell plate, and that carries the primer over to the primer station, and then it drops through down into the seeder. And how that works is when the plate comes up, it spreads these fingers and it'll let one primer drop out. So we got a primer in there. So run the handle down again, and you can see how this opened up, so it just dropped another primer. So we'll take that out, and now we've got a primer in it. So right about there. So now it's primed. We're going to go over to the next station and open that up and drop a powder charge. And the reason the shell plate's not rotating is because I disengage the prowl that does that. And you can't see in here real good because it's a dark powder and it's a black hull, but trust me, there's powder in there. And so now before, make sure that's closed. So now the wad guide is swung out, place a wad in there, and pull the handle down again, and it pushes the wad right into the hull. And Steve mentioned wad fingers. This press has them too. There's if I can unscrew this little, plastic piece with all those fingers on it is what the wad goes through. Those go down into the mouth of the hull to make sure the wad goes into the hull and doesn't check or catch on the side. And it will tear the wads up, it'll tear the hull up, it'll do all kinds of interesting things. So now we have a wad in there, and it may be seated fairly deep, but it gives me good crimps, and that's what I'm after. So the wad's in it. So now we're going to come over to the shot station. Open that up, pull the handle again, and we drop shot into that hull. And we also dropped another primer. So now you can see the shot in it. If I don't shake it too badly and shake all the shot out of it and make sure that's closed. So now we're going to go to pre-crimp. This is where it starts to close the fold. And the thing with pre-crimp is that the tighter it is, the smaller the hole is, the more material you're going to have for the crimp, and it's going to be more closed. And that might be one of the reasons Steve has some of those open crimps that he has is because his holes, from what I saw in the video, that's a pretty big hole in them. So anyway, so there's pre-crimp, and it's a little bit smaller than a pencil, but you can see it's all started to fold over. And then it goes back to, oh, what is that? Oh no, not another primer. Now we're at the crimp station itself, and that'll take the folds and push them down. And that gives us, pretty good looking crimp. That one's a little deep, it's got a little hole in it, which is no big thing. So this is probably a little bit shorter hull than some of the others, which is why it has that hole in it. And now to the last station, and then it'll drop out if it rotated. So that's a loaded shell. That's a fairly flat crimp. Some guys might say that's a little deep. I think that's just about right. That's basically the steps that are involved, with the press in loading. So now we'll do it, for reel and load it up all the way around. So, each of those steps that I pulled the handle on before, all of that stuff happens at the same time, and you'll see that now. So I put a hole in it, decap it. The primer dropped. We're going to seat the primer, decap it. Another primer dropped. We're going to turn the powder drop on, pull the handle again. We dropped powder into that hole. Now we're going to place a wad. And that's one of the things that this press will do. It stopped for a second because I was moving it too fast and the primer cocked going into the seating station, and you can feel that. Like I said, every press has its idiosyncrasies, and it's like what you get used to. So now we're going to drop some shot in that, put a hole in here, which we did, put a hole in here, place a wad, put a hole in, place a wad, and I'm sitting a little bit different angle than I usually do so you can see what's happening here. But I can get going on this thing and I can do a box of primers, which is 100 rounds in about 10 minutes. I can do the whole bag of shot in about an hour. But I'll tell you, once you get through 300 rounds and you load that fourth box of primers, it's like, okay, I'm going to take a break now. So, and I'm looking to see that it's dropping a primer. I'm looking to see that there's shot in the hull, and I'm looking to see what the crimp looks like. Because if I get some crimps that have a torn pedal in them, I'll take that out of the press. I'll put a red mark on the back of it, and that'll get shot once more and then left at the range. So that's about how the progressive press works. So I'm going to pretend that we're finished with this now. I'm not going to put any more holes in it, and you can still see kind of what's going on with it. So there's not a hole in it, and I didn't put a wad in it either, so I'm sure glad that's okay. Caught that. See, this is, if you don't mess up, you can go pretty quick. That was a mess up. And so we're doing that. So that's good. We don't need this. We'll put another wad in it. And this is where you have to pay attention, or you'll forget to close something and you'll have a pretty good mess to clean up. So we don't need any more of those. We'll turn the shot off after we just dropped it. And there's another primer. And that's that. So that's basically what's involved with the progressive press. There's several progressives out there. Like I said, I like this one. It's probably medium priced of those that are available. There's Posnus, Warren, and those can get to be pretty spendy. Spolar Gold can be $1,400. A lot of the other progressives do have assists on them. Mech makes a press with hydraulic operation. They also make one with an electric operation. So the electric one, you're just pushing a couple of buttons. The hydraulic ones usually have a foot switch or something like that associated with them to do the press cycling. There's a gas assist offered for this press. And what that does is slow the shell plate down or when you're pushing the handle back up. Because you can get going too fast and the shell that's to be ejected from the press could fly out this way or it'll drop over the back, but it won't drop down through the hole. Also, if you get going too fast, the primers, when they drop into the seating station, rather than dropping straight down, they will cock and it'll stop the plate. You can feel that. It takes just a second to fix it, but it's like any press that once you run it and work with it for a while, you get used to it. You can feel what's happening with it. I just like it. I think I'm used to it now. I have 2 of them. I like them, and they work really good for me. That's pretty much the basics of loading on a progressive press. You can make a good amount of ammo in a reasonable amount of time with one of these things, and you can make, as with all hand loading, the load that you want, but you can produce a quality product that would rival, opening a box from Remington and seeing what the shells look like. I think that pretty much does it for today. And I don't know all of those letters and numbers and hashes and all those combinations, but you guys probably already do. And if you have any questions at all on anything in this episode or Steve's episode, don't hesitate to send us a message and we'll respond as best we can. And thanks for watching.